Recently, there is a lot of lawsuits and the scams going on in the promissory note space, one of them being call out properties. So if you or your community is having issues getting your promissory note money back and you're wondering what your options are to get the funds back, how promissory notes are litigated and enforced, this video is made for you. I'm going to share my personal story with you, litigating and enforcing on the promissory note, the process that I went through here in Ontario. So I hope that's going to give you some idea how the process will look like. But please bear in mind, this is just me sharing my personal story. This video is not the legal advice. Okay, so long story short, I provided a promissory note to a borrower that's actually quite established in Northern Ontario. He had a great cash flow from his rental properties, and at the time I gave him the loan, he was actually financially sound. He has completed so many BRRRR projects very successfully and was able to pull his money out from these projects, so I trust this person and his abilities a lot. But fast forward to the maturity date of this promissory note, this person didn't make a partial payment of the principal to me, but then he just completely stopped communicating with me altogether in regards to the rest of the payout. So I had to engage a lawyer to start the legal process. If you're suffering from a promissory note default, it's of your best interest to start the legal action right after these damages, because the limitation period will still apply to this kind of damages too. That means if you don't start litigating within 2 years after these damages, you're gonna lose your right to even sue after 2 years. So the legal work started with a demand letter demanding the lawyer to pay back the loan as agreed, but of course nothing really happened after the letter was sent out. And I had to pay for this lawyer to have this demand letter drafted and sent out. Now, the fees you incur during any litigation and enforcement process can be rolled into the principal if you ever successfully enforce, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But before enforcement even starts, you need to litigate to get a judgment. After receiving no action whatsoever from this demand letter, I had to hire a litigation lawyer to start a statement of claim, which I was asked to pay a retainer for. The retainer fees with different lawyers are going to be different, but most litigation lawyers will ask you for a retainer, and they're all very expensive. Now, in terms of getting a judgment for a promissory note, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not familiar with the technical side of the legal work, but I was told many times that for promissory note defaults, you as a creditor can apply for a over-the-counter OTC judgment, and you don't have to bring a motion to see a judge. Because promissory note defaults, it's called a liquidated damage. You can get a judgment over the counter, and the process to get a OTC judgment versus bringing a motion to see a judge is going to be way quicker and way cheaper as well. So if you're a lawyer or you know how these things work in more details, please leave a comment. After the demand letter, the statement of claim was personally served to the defendant through a process server. A process server is kind of like a high-end delivery person, making sure the borrower, now called the defendant, has to receive all the documents so they know what's going on and they can choose to defend themselves if they want to, or if they think they haven't done any wrongdoing, or they simply just have a different perspective. But in my case, the borrower did not defend himself because he hasn't made a payment to me, and therefore there's nothing for him to defend himself for, so we were able to continue the legal process to get a judgment. During this litigation enforcement process, I was responsible for making the legal payments, and some of them I was able to roll into the principal once I get to the enforcement stage. I litigated in 2023, and at the time the court was really jammed in Ontario here, so it took us almost 7 months just to get a judgment. The judgment we got was also interest bearing, meaning the borrower, since he hasn't paid since the maturity date, the interest he missed will be added into the principal, and the new principal becomes the new principal post-judgment. But funny enough, also a little bit sad, the judge reduced my interest on the promissory note from the original 12% to 5%. At the time, residential mortgages were well over 6%, so I wasn't really sure why a promissory note, a much higher risk instrument, is only entitled to 5% in interest. But anyway, at least we now have a judgment and we can start the enforcement process. And getting the judgment, the litigation part, is only the easy part. Because during this phase, it's just you spending money to obtain the judgment. It's really a problem that spending money can solve. The enforcement part is actually the uphill battle, because promissory notes are not tied to any securities. So I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people that have this kind of paper judgments, but they will never be able to enforce, which is really sad. So after we obtained this judgment, I hired the same lawyer to do searches to see if the defendant, now called the judgment debtor, has any assets in any of the jurisdictions here in Ontario. And lucky for me, the defendant still owned some properties in a few jurisdictions. So in this case, the best way to enforce on this promissory note default judgment is to use the writ of seizure and sale, one of the most popular writs. So how this writ of seizure and sale works is that I can register a writ in a certain jurisdiction, and the judgment debtor will not have to pay the writ off before any purchase, refinance, or sale to even happen. But with this particular writ of seizure and sale, I had to wait 6 months before engaging a sheriff to sell these properties. and I am still unaware of the cost of hiring a sheriff to sell properties because I didn't get to go this route. At the time I put a writ on, these properties were power sold by their mortgage lenders. And because there was some equity after paying off these mortgages, the equity came to me through this writ of seizure and sale and was able to pay me out fully. But I was told a few times that hiring a sheriff to sell properties can be very, very challenging because not only the sheriffs will have to appraise the properties, but also organize the auction. And if there's less than 2 people that show up, an auction cannot even carry forward because there's not enough bidders. And all the cost is to be paid by you, the one enforcing, before you receive any proceeds. So looking back at this promissory note, I feel extremely lucky that I was able to get my funds back because once again, promissory notes are not attached to any security, and that means after I spend money to get a judgment, there's no guarantee that I'm gonna get any money back. I can literally just have a paper judgment for the rest of my life and never have a chance to receive even a penny back. So if there's anybody approaching you to borrow a promissory note, I highly recommend you not to do it because promissory notes come with unlimited risk and a very, very, very limited return. There was a lot of stress on me during the litigation and enforcement process. Sometimes I woke up around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, blaming myself for doing something that I shouldn't have done, and I couldn't just fall back to sleep. So I don't want any of this to ever happen to you. So I hope you're finding this video somehow helpful, and if you like my content, please leave a comment, subscribe, and see you next time.